I guess it's time for us to start. And I know from the title of this class, it probably doesn't look like one of the most interesting titles that you could have gone to. And I know more people will be coming in here in a little bit. But I'm doing this class. It's a class that I took in 1974 at Oklahoma Christian. And I kind of taught on this one time in Chowchilla, California, I think in about 1975. And so I am by no means an expert on this whole topic or anything else. The name of the class that I took with Raymond was Great Christian Doctrines. And a lot of people have a little bit of a problem with the idea of the word doctrine. That basically you could substitute that for teaching, great Christian teachings. And what we're going to try to do with this, yep, the microphone is on. Yep. They said take it down a little bit. Oh, tip it down. I can eat it and you can hear me. Let me see what else we can try to do. It's up as far as it'll go. Okay, can you hear me now? All right, we'll try that with it. We'll try that with it a little bit. Anyway, I took this course back in 1974 at Oklahoma Christian under Raymond Kelsey. I'll be leaning a lot on what Raymond said in the class. And again, I am not an expert on this subject, but it really is an interesting subject once you get past some ground laying. And we're going to be doing some of that ground laying on it today and possibly part of next week a little bit. But the thing is, have you ever wondered why you believe in God? Why does mankind believe in God to begin with, other than somebody told you he existed? And that's what the class is about looking into the different ideas that have come through time since the death of Christ that have been written down and propitiated through all times on why do we believe there is a God? Why do we believe that he exists? And what are our sources for that? And what makes it important, or what gives it credence that it's true? And so that's what this is about. It's about the study of God, or theology. And when the title says the Great Christian Doctrines, it's taking in all of the world thought. So this first part of this class is going to be just about kind of, oh goodness, the word went right out of my head. About human thought, basically, is what it is. We're going to talk about Socrates, Aristotle, people like that you've heard of off and on here and there, either in grade school, high school, or different things, and about their philosophy of what's going on and who came up with what with that. So that's part of it. That's part of what it's going to be about. And there are different theologies about that that are out there. And the world views are important to us on what they mean when we look at that. Boy, I just got to be right on this thing for it to work, I guess. Why do you believe in God? It's kind of natural that man would want proof of why we believe in God. Why do you think we do believe in God? Okay. Okay, Betty had an answer to that for us, and she said that this is for the YouTube stuff to hear because they can't hear what you ask out here. But she said that we believe what we're taught with, and then later on we start wanting proof, and we think about how do we prove that, and so that's somewhat what this is about. But it's natural that man would want proof of the existence of God other than the fact that someone told them. So they start looking for that. And in the early days of time, this went through the Old Testament, where people wondered where God was and how did God prove himself, and the New Testament. And what's important to think about that is that until Moses, things weren't written down. The Old Testament wasn't written until Moses was alive, and God told him, write these things down, tell the people these things. And that's when it started to be written down about what was going on in the world. Prior to that, it was pretty much by mouth. You learn what you're told. What somebody told you, you believe it. If it's an absolute lie, you don't have to believe it. But that's when you start learning that you need to prove some things. They need to be proved to you to know, is it a lie or is it real? But when things were starting to be written down and the history was there, it helped in order to see that. And there were several different kinds of arguments that happened in those early times about making people think that there is a God. When Brother Herndon was here between our preachers and was talking about some stuff one time, he hit on these, and we're going to talk about them a little more. There's the cosmological argument. And the cosmological argument is that that there is a cosmos out there. There's things around us. Where did it come from? Where did it begin? How do you know where it began? And it's amazing to me that these guys, and some of them like Kant, who's one of the thinkers in some of these arguments, never got more than 40 miles away from his home in his lifetime in Prussia. 40 miles, never got away from it 40 miles. Yet he has the ability to sit there and ponder and think and come up with some arguments that are still used as rational arguments today on what's going on. Where did God come from? Why is there air? You know, all those type questions. And it's just amazing to me that people can do that. I was talking to my son David about that yesterday a little bit, and he said, well, they had more time on their hands. They didn't have TV telling them what to think. They didn't have radio. They didn't have, you know, they worked sun up till sundown. They went back to their house, and they thought. They thought about things. And as our dear sister Dorothy would have said sometimes, how lazy do we get that we don't even think sometimes? You know, and that's true. But they come up with these ideas. And in this particular case, it happened between the time of Christ to the Greeks when they took over, and then on through the Western world and through the existence of different times. Socrates, Plato, and all those guys started thinking about these things, and the cosmological argument was one of the biggest ones that they had. And I'm having to go through some things here a little bit back and forth. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Right. The statement is made that during childhood, going to church and hearing about where the world came from and the Genesis account, and going through that, and then going to school and hearing about the theory of the Big Bang Theory and things coming together, crashing together. The cosmological argument is not the Big Bang Theory, though. The cosmological argument is that there are things out there, and to their knowledge, nothing ever happened that wasn't made. So you think about your field needs to be hoed or plowed. It doesn't happen. You don't wake up and it's done. You have to go out and plow it. So there is a moon, there are stars, there are planets, there are things that we see, trees growing. Where did they start? So these guys start thinking about, well, it came from a seed, you know. Where'd the seed come from? Well, it had to be watered, and then it grew into a plant and all that. Yeah, but where did that come from? You know, where did the water come from? And they kept taking it back. And the cosmological argument is that there is a meaning and a cause for everything. And if there's a meaning and a cause for everything, there had to be somebody that had control of the cause and had control of what was going on. And so it goes back, and with that thought, it leads back to trying to find out where it all started from the very beginning for the existence of all things. And that there is a greater power somewhere. So it starts that idea to think of that as being God. The next one I'm going to talk about is the teleological argument. And Plato worked on this quite a bit. And that is more about the seasons and the times. What makes the seasons and the times happen. And it's pretty much gets down to a nature study or a nature worship, that nature is it. It's been used in every age, including David. King David saw the glory of God in the heavens in Psalms 19, 1 through 4, and is noted by Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Impressed by the design of nature, saw everything under the control of an unmoved mover. Something to go has to be moved, has to be pushed. And to start all of this, to start the sun coming up and going down, to start the moon circling and coming around, to see the stars move, because you can do that at night. You can lay down and look at one spot and have a reference, and you can see the Milky Way moving slowly, very slowly, painstakingly. But if you got nothing to do at night but to lay down and look up at the stars, you might notice that. Who started it going? You can't put marbles on the floor and expect them to play marbles with each other. Somebody's got to flip one to make it go and hit another one and move it. And the teleological argument is that everything's in motion. Everything is natural. Everything is good. What does that? How does it happen? So they start going backwards and backwards, trying to figure it out. Again, like, where'd the plant come from? A seed. Where'd the seed come from? Another plant. Where'd that plant come from? A seed. Where'd that seed come from? You keep going backwards, and you come up with the idea that the things that move have to have been pushed by an unmovable object. And that, in some sense, they think, well, that's just nature. But other ones say there has to be a supreme being that started that. And if there's a supreme being that started that, when did he start? How long has he been here? Where's he from? So you can see how these guys would just sit and ponder these things and maybe hear somebody say something else and go home and ponder that. And it's amazing with the things that came up. A man named Pauly, and I forget his first name. he had a watch argument about where does a watch come from? Was it produced by other watches? Because in nature, we see animals produced by other animals. Where did the watch come from? With all its intrinsic workings and everything that's in it, where did it come from? Well, somebody had to build it. And when they figured out how to build it, where did the material come from? So again, you're working backwards with all these rational arguments pretty much on how things happen. The ontological argument was one that was about the discussion of the study of what's real or has being. And it's interesting, you know, how they come up and they say, well, do the animals think these things? Do the animals have an inquisitive mind that says, where did I come from? It's not apparent they do, but I think anybody that's got a dog or a cat or an animal that's house trained and they have an accident and you go point to the accident and say, what's that? They tuck their ears and walk away. So I think in some sense they have a conscience, or they know they've done something they're not supposed to do. But the other side of that is, if man has a conscience, if man knows there's some things that are inalienably right and some things that are wrong, then where did that come from? What gives him that conscience? And that's the basis of this argument on what's going on. And with them, that back in the first half of the 17th century and on in, they were thinking about that and trying to figure out, is there a being out there, a true being that has the ability to know right and wrong, that gives us that conscience in us to know what's right and wrong? Right now, today, in our world, I wonder if there is any conscience. You know, do people really think that some of the things they're doing are okay by any standard? I think they've buried their conscience. But I think we know there are some things that are wrong. Sexually fooling with a child, an infant, a baby, a 9-month-old, raping it. We know that's wrong. We know that's wrong. Nobody has to tell us that's wrong, but yet some people do that. So I think they can bury their conscience. They can decide it's not there. But these men knew that there were some things that were just wrong. And if we know it's wrong, then we know what's right. How do we do that? Why aren't we like the animals in the wild that live to eat, to reproduce, and to die? And that's all there is. So that's one of the ways that they talk about. There's the moral argument too, that actually the moral argument is more so with what I was talking about right then than the ontological. The ontological is more about order and about motion and about things like that are set in. The moral argument is more about there is a conscience. And also with the moral argument is where Rene Descartes, Rene Descartes, anybody know? The great philosopher. Descartes. It's spelled like it should be with an S at the end, and so it always throws me. But I always thought it was Rene Descartes. Rene Descartes was trying to take things back to where he could have an absolute truth, something that nobody could deny. He couldn't deny himself, no matter what. And the only absolute truth that he could back up to was that I, Rene Descartes, exist. I am. And you think about that, that's the only thing you can prove. I'm alive. I feel me touch me. I hear my voice. I pinch my finger, you know. So he says that since he exists, and that's the only thing that he can show that absolutely is without repute, is that since I exist, I had to be made somehow. Since I have a mind and I can think, I had to be made somehow. Back that up. Well, he knows his parents. He knows his grandparents. He knows. When you back it up, he comes to the conclusion there has to be a personal being out there that started it and was before. So that's some of their thoughts. The aesthetic argument, if you'll remember, Descartes' final conclusion was, I think, therefore I am. I have the ability to think, therefore I am. The aesthetic argument is one that Bob Herndon talked to us about a little bit, about the beauty of things. You go to a museum and you see the beautiful artwork. You read a poem and it brings you to tears. You see a block of marble that somebody is chipped away at and made a great statue that looks just like a human. And their idea is that something so beautiful, why would we think of that on our own? Why wouldn't we be more worried about what we eat, what we do that way, and just exist like an animal? There has to be something in there that put that appreciation for those things into us. Where did it come from? So that's kind of the aesthetic argument. And then there's a historical argument. The historical argument is the one that we can hang our hat on more than anything else. And that's the one that does require a belief in God's Word. And I think that's the hiccup that stops a lot of people from believing in a religious world and a world of God, is the fact that you do have to have your belief in something when you do that. Somebody, if they would, look up John 14, chapter 8. And if you would, go ahead and read that. That's about Philip when he wanted proof from Christ that that's who he was, or who God was, wanting more proof of who God was. Someone got that and want to read it, please? Okay. So Philip said, Christ, show us God so we can believe in him. And then Jesus says, Philip, how long have I been with you? How long have I been here with you? Don't you know that if you want to see God, you can see God in me? Because I am with the Father, he's with me, basically. He is the Father. But the whole idea is that it's a show me thing, and there's evidence to be seen about all the things that are there. We candidly look at the Scripture to find things, and it's important in this historical study that we're able to do that. What is the Old Testament about? Okay, God's people. What's one of the biggest things that in the New Testament and anywhere in the Old Testament the Jewish people are always looking back to? What are they remembering? The Exodus. The Exodus. God saving them out of Egypt, bringing them out, his people, starting a nation from one man in the world. And what did that one nation have as it was traipsing around and going places and doing things? What did it have? God was with them, and God's power was with them. And people realized that God's power was more powerful than their gods, Who was the first person to realize that in a true sense? Huh? Pharaoh. Pharaoh. He had the proof with all the plagues of what had happened. And that's a historical fact. People say, no, that's just in the Bible. That's not a historical fact. But it's not just in the Bible. It's in other writings and hieroglyphics and things like that of the time that there was the great plagues, that there was these things that happened. And over things have been proven historically that what's in the Bible was there. Even the flood, finding a sedimentary layer in one level on the earth that proves that there was a flood at some time. All these things are there in the creation, and the historical proof keeps coming and coming. I want to read something that Raymond said. He said, however, to us today, the most meaningful event in history is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. As before stated to this writer, the most impressive and convincing of all evidence is this, and the establishing of this fact establishes all other facts which the believer might wish to establish, including the truthfulness of the Old Testament record and the fact of immortality. Something over 1,900 years ago, in a definite locality on this earth, when Herod was king of the Jews and Augustus was emperor of Rome, a child was born. Fact. In all of the history, you can look back, and that's a written down history outside of the Bible as a fact. When he was king at a definite location, an emperor was there as well on the throne at the time. Augustus was emperor of Rome, and a child was born. It has been said that the greatest truth of the Old Testament is that man was made in the image of God, and that the greatest truth of the New Testament is that God was made in the likeness of man. This one who was born among men lived and taught among men until he was crucified by his people. He was taken down from the cross and placed in a tomb that was sealed and guarded by Imperial Rome. On the third day, the tomb was empty. Facts, historical facts. If you go to Rome's history, that's facts written down. Okay, the tomb was empty. Is that much of a proof? What did the Jews say about the tomb being empty? Okay, disciples came and got him. When that failed, what did they say after that? Or what did they do? Well, actually, that's all part of it. The Jews bribed the imperial guard and said, tell him that his disciples came and got him. So he bribed them and lied and said they came and got him. That was the Jewish people. That's what they said. His disciples, did the disciples believe in the resurrection at first? They did not. They weren't expecting it. They weren't looking for it to happen. They were shocked. They were beat down. They thought it was over. Until the third day. And Mary went to the tomb. And Mary came running back saying, the stone's rolled back and he's not in there. What was their concern? What was the disciples, apostles, what was their concern when they saw that? Yeah, I think they wanted to see for themselves, but I think they were thinking somebody stole his body. What more are they going to do to it? How are they going to desecrate it? They went looking for the body in the tomb, yet the tomb was empty. That's part of the facts of the historical account. What do you think the Jews would be doing when they couldn't find the body, what do you think the apostles and followers were doing when they couldn't find the body? What do you think they did? What would you do? Start searching. You would have started searching. You would have been looking for, trying to find out, trying to set it right, trying to bury him if you were the apostles. If you were the Jews, you're trying to prove that, he didn't rise. But the historical fact is that body was not in the tomb, and that body was never found. Did the body come back? Yes, it did, didn't it? And the body came back, and when it came back, how many people saw it? Just those 12 apostles and Mary and her sister? I think, I know it says 150 people at least at one point in the Bible that talked about him in the time that he was back on earth. And what did they want? What did the apostles want when they saw him? They wanted to know if it was really him, didn't they? They wanted to know. To the point that 8 days after he was around and had risen, what did Thomas want? Yeah, he said, I can't believe it until I put my hands in your side or the holes in your wrist. And so he did. That's in the Bible. I'm sure it's in some other historical writings that come by mouth. But we know he was there. We know he was risen, and he went back to his Father. It's amazing how all of that happens, and what lays on the empty tomb, how important that is, the idea of the empty tomb. And we kind of forget about that, I think. I know David says that his favorite time is the Easter time, even over the birth of Christ, the idea of the resurrection and the empty tomb. And I think that's an important thing. Not that man made a holiday necessarily out of it, but the idea of the empty tomb, at least it's celebrated at some point. Most people just think of it as time to chase the bunny rabbit and dye the eggs. But the fact that we think of an empty tomb and the fact that that means so much to the historical argument that there is a God, he has a plan, there was a way he did it that culminated with his being dying on the cross, a terrible death, being put in a tomb, the tomb being empty, him teaching some more. Absolutely they would. What motive would the apostles and the disciples that were following him have to hide a body? What happened to all of them? To the apostles, at least. They died for their beliefs. They were martyred. They were killed. Does a man go ahead and die for something that he knows is a lie? Not willingly. He might be accused, and it may be a lie, and he may go to the death, penalty, and he may die. But if it's a lie, he wouldn't do it willingly. It wouldn't be something that he would just keep on, he'd be begging for his life most likely and begging for things like that. But if the apostles hit him, say they put him in a vat of acid, got rid of it, poured it down the creek, whatever. If they did that, what would their motive be? They're going to die for perpetuating a lie. And that's not going to happen. They had no reason to do that. So there's a lot of historical accounts that really do push the idea that there was a Christ. He was crucified, he was buried, the tomb was empty, he was seen after that, his followers kept things going. That's probably the strongest argument that we can have in our hearts, that there is a God. It may be hard for us to understand why he had to do that, to let his son or his body die on a cross. But that's love. Go ahead, Betty, you had a question? Yeah. Yeah. Them to the apostles and the time that Jesus was on earth. And there's another period of time in there after the last apostle died called the patristic period. The patristic period is the period of the church fathers. And that goes from right around 175 after BC, or not BC, AD, to around 350 is the original patristic period, and that's the time that the church fathers, which Josephus was considered a church father. He was a Christian man that followed the laws of the apostles and things, and the first century church. Go ahead, Faye. The period, patristic, Patristic, patristic period. Right, I'm a terrible speller, but I think it has to do with the father. I think that's part of the Greek word for father, the church fathers, the patristic period. I think that's where that comes from. But in that time was the church, the great councils. Tell me what time it is, Jason, if it's time or anything. First bell, okay. All right. Where was I? Yeah. Okay, the councils that happened, you remember the Nicene Council and things like that happened along the way? Okay, we're getting into a time with the patristic fathers that was a time that the first century church gradually, slowly turned in to the Roman Catholic Church. Okay? That's something of the history that's there. What happened was they started having their elders who began to be called bishops. They still had deacons and their bishops. And then they got to the idea that there were so many things happening in the world because of the way they were doing things that they needed a government. And so one of the things that happened was that during that patristic period, one of the elders started saying the Logos wasn't eternal. Christ wasn't eternal. He wasn't there in the beginning with God, in the beginning of the earth. And the Holy Spirit and all that wasn't there. It was God. Somewhere before that creation, God made him, but he wasn't eternal. And one of the deacons said, no, you're wrong. That's wrong. And it got into such a conflict throughout the whole world there, in the world of Christendom and everything else that was there, that it was causing fights and divisions and troubles enough that they decided, oh, we got to get together. We got to get together and decide who's right and who's wrong on this. So they came together at Nicaea, and during that time they had the Nicene Conference. And during that conference they decided the elder was wrong. He had no authority to say that, and the deacon was right. And that was the reason for the Nicene Council and what happened in a nutshell, and what happened there. And then later on, a problem comes up with things, and they decide they need another council together. So there's about 5 or 6 councils. I'll have to look. I'm not there yet in my restudy stuff, but in those councils, as they kept coming along, you can see going back to the formation of the Roman Catholic Church, because there are bishops that are over other elders, and then they decide to have a pope that can be the final say over everything. And so it gradually turns into the Roman Catholic Church until the Reformation period, and then the Restoration period that comes later. So that's just part of the history of it, and part of what to think about with it. I will try to be better. I realize that some of my notes are on onion paper, and up here when you try to read onion paper and it's got stuff behind it, you can't. And so I will try to get this either retyped on something else. But actually, I bet none of you know what this was copied on. Mimeograph machine. That's my mimeograph notes. And you can see how it crinkled in there, because when they get wet, they crunch up sometimes. And so, yeah. So I was also going to do that. This has got an in-depth reading of these periods, and if anybody's interested in it, I will retype that, and I can make some copies. So if you're interested in it, we can do that. And it's going to tell you how many mistakes I made today. And if there's anybody out there on YouTube watching this thinking that guy doesn't know what he's talking about, that's probably why too. But it's a little bit confusing to me. I thought I had it down for that. But this is the base forming stuff. What we're going to eventually get into is a lot more on things that we can use. Not just these arguments that philosophers made to believe in God, but also who has authority. Do the councils have authority? Does the Pope have authority? Does the church have authority? Do the elders have authority? Do we have authority? Who has the authority to tell us what we need to know? So that's where we're going to get as we go through this more and more. So thank you, and I hope I can keep it interesting and not totally boring. This truly should be the most boring part of it. There's going to be a lot of scriptures in it as we go along, and we're going to learn, I think, together on it. So bear with me. We'll get her did.